Welcome to this bonus archived episode from the backlist of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my nearly 300 podcast case reviews with former colleagues. As part of my pre-celebration for my 300th episode with my special guest, FBI Director Christopher Wray, this is a re-released and re-edited show of the original episodes 57 and 58 with retired agent Eddie Freyer. I'm often asked to name my favorite episode, and I really have too many to name. But Eddie's case review was the one that made me realize that hosting and producing FBI Retired Case File Review had become a mission for me. Retired agent Eddie Freyer served in the FBI for 30 years, 4 as a clerical employee in the Pittsburgh division and 26 as a special agent in the San Francisco field office. In this episode, Eddie reviews the intensive investigation to recover Polly Klaas, a 12-year-old girl abducted from her bedroom by a stranger during a slumber party at her home with 2 friends. Eddie was the case agent who, working in conjunction with his partners from the Petaluma Police Department, worked countless hours for more than 60 days without a single day off. The Polly Klaas abduction investigation became a major national story. Every parent could relate to the fear that their children could be taken from their bedrooms during the night. Coincidentally, October 2023 marks the 30th anniversary of this tragic incident. Eddie's daughter-in-law, Kim Cross, has written In Light of All Darkness, Inside the Polly Klaas Kidnapping and the Search for America's Child, a comprehensive account of the abduction and how the case transformed the Bureau's approach to solving crimes. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can join my reader team, buy me a cup of coffee, and learn more about me and my books. Actually, since finding potential readers is the reason I started this podcast, if you want to show me your love for putting out 300 plus episodes, please consider buying my 2 FBI crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers, available wherever books are sold as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks, which you can get from Audible and Spotify. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I'm pleased to introduce my guest, Eddie Freyer. Hi, Eddie.
Hi.
I am absolutely thrilled to talk to you because I know that you talk about this case all over the country, even internationally. So to have you on my podcast, giving us an insight into this unbelievable kidnapping case is just fantastic. So thank you so much for agreeing to let me interview you.
Jerry, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
When you first learned about Polly Klaas, how long had you been in the Santa Rosa RA, and did you have a good relationship with the local law enforcement?
Well, I was notified on the night of the kidnapping. What happened on the night of the kidnapping, it was a Friday night, October 1st, 1993. The kidnapping occurred about 10:30. The Petaluma Police Department responded, and about 11:15, they put out their first bolo. The bolo went out on the network. It was put out over NCIC, and the San Francisco office, the night clerk down there, read the bolo that there was a potential kidnapping in Petaluma, and they were keen enough to recognize that that might be something we would get involved in. They called me shortly before midnight and said, hey, we're getting a bolo that there might be a kidnapping going on in Petaluma, which is out of the area that Santa Rosa handles. And they gave me some basic information, some contact information. I called the officer that was in charge, that was Sergeant Vale Bello. I had known Sergeant Bello for years. I worked with Petaluma PD on a number of different cases, bank robberies and other things. And so I had a great relationship, and they basically said, hey, if you can help out, we could sure use your help. Not quite sure what we have here, but it could be a stranger abduction case. This was 1993. Northern California had endured a cluster of unsolved stranger abduction cases involving young children. Amber Schwartz Garcia, Eileen Michaloff, Kevin Collins, J.C. DeGard. All of these cases, as well as others, had remained unsolved. And we were frustrated, greatly frustrated. The law enforcement community, as well as the community at large, was very frustrated that these cases remained unsolved and we had no solutions to these children that just disappeared. And these were children that were not involved in risk behavior. They weren't hanging out in a park late at night, hitchhiking on a freeway or a dark road somewhere. These were kids that were very young, 10, 11, 12 years old, who were just playing in the front yards. They were at home when their mother or parent was just inside the doorway or walking home from a ice skating practice in one instance, and they just vanished. We were working those cases jointly with the local law enforcement agencies, and we had lots of kind of task forces set up here in San Francisco to deal with these abduction cases, but we were striking out. We had absolutely no suspects, no leads that would indicate that we were on the right track on these investigations.
I take it in most cases you discovered that none of them were connected.
All of them except the J.C. DeGard case. Now, she was a young gal that was kidnapped in South Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, we all remember her, yeah.
Yeah, she remained missing for 17 years and was recovered in Vallejo, California, but the others are still unsolved, and we don't think they're connected. There's just not enough similar factors in those cases to say that they're connected. We knew, the FBI office knew, that if we were going to continue to have these stranger abduction cases, we would come under a lot of scrutiny. So that's what, when the BOLO came out and the office in San Francisco thought, okay, there might be another kidnapping, the notification happened very quickly. I got dressed that night, got in my car. I called an agent friend of mine in Petaluma, Tom Lafreniere. I picked him up, and we headed over to the crime scene. And we arrived at the crime scene in Petaluma, right around 12:15, 12:20. So we were about 2 hours into the case when we arrived.
Tell us a little bit more about the circumstances under which Polly went missing.
The circumstances of this kidnapping are the reasons why this case became a national recognized case. It was very high in the media and public awareness. This was a Friday night, Petaluma, California, a very normal neighborhood, a mixture of white-collar, blue-collar homes, nice parks. The neighborhood was not known for any kind of issues, any kind of crime issues there. It was a normal family, although the mother, Eve, and the father, Mark, were divorced. They had a very healthy relationship with their children, 2 daughters, Polly, 12, and Annie was 7. Polly was having a slumber party with 2 of her friends, Kate McLean and Jillian Pelham, a slumber party of 3 12-year-old girls, an activity probably repeated millions of times in this country on any given Friday night or Saturday night. And her 2 friends came over. They were going to play games in her room. Mom was there with a younger sister. About 10 o'clock, Eve told the girls that she was going to go to bed and try to keep the noise down. And Eve went to her bedroom with Annie, the younger sister, and took a sleeping pill and went to sleep. A normal family function. The 3 girls played in their bedroom for about a half an hour, and Polly needed to go out into the living room to get a pillow, some extra blankets. And when she opened the door of her bedroom, there was a figure of a man standing there, a man dressed in dark clothing, a beard, somebody they hadn't seen before. And they, at first, thought it was kind of a joke. It was just one of those things they just didn't expect to see, and they thought maybe this was part of the party. And then they looked down and they saw a knife in this man's hand. And he entered the bedroom and he said, "If you scream, I'm going to slit your throats." And they realized at that point in time, oh my gosh, what's going on? You can imagine what was going through these 3 12-year-old girls who were just moments before playing a board game in the bedroom, and they were dressed up and they were talking about school and their friends and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, here's this figure of a man with a knife who enters the bedroom. He starts immediately tying them up He asked some very kind of odd questions that make sense later. He asked, who lives here? Who else is in the house? He seemed to be a little confused that there were 3 girls in the bedroom, but he started tying them up with some ligatures that he brought into the bedroom with him. He cut a couple of Nintendo game cords to help tie up the girls. He gagged them with some pillowcases that he got off the bed. When he asked who lived here, Polly said, I do. After he tied up all 3 girls, he grabbed Polly. He told the other 2 girls to be quiet, that count to 1,000, and by the time they got done counting, Polly would be back. He grabbed Polly and took her out of the bedroom and left the house. The girls said that they knew that he left through the front door because the screen door has a really unique creaking sound when it opens and closes, and they heard that. The girls kind of waited just a few moments. They quickly kind of scrambled, got themselves untied a little bit, and then went in and woke up Eve and told them of what had just occurred. Of course, Eve is now coming out of a sleep, and she's a little confused. She immediately calls 911, and Petaluma Police arrive a few minutes later. So their arrival is we estimate about 10:40, 10:45, I believe. It's about the time when they arrive.
He asked who lives here. It doesn't sound like he was actually stalking Polly. Did he just pick this house? Did he know young girls were there?
Well, that's a very good question, Jerry. The fact that when he asked who lives here is very important to this case and understanding what happened. And we do believe he was stalking the house, that at some point in time, not the day of the kidnapping, but a couple of days and maybe about a week before, we find out later in the investigation that Davis's mother lives in Petaluma. Davis had been recently paroled about 6 months before this kidnapping from a prior charge of kidnapping and assault. And the parole records indicated that he was asking for weekend passes to go to Petaluma to try to find his mother. He never did. The assumption on our part was that during those visits to Petaluma in the attempt to search to find his mother, he found his way to Polly's neighborhood, and at some point in time, he must have seen Polly either coming or going from that house and associated the young gal that lives in that house to a gal that he was interested in. The kidnapper, Richard Allen Davis, in this case, was diagnosed as a sexual sadist by Park Dietz. He's a pretty famous forensic psychologist. In our case, during the trial, Park Dietz indicated that fantasy of this young gal that lived in this house probably started days or weeks before the kidnapping. And then when he went in that night, that Friday night, he wanted the girl that lived there. And when he got into the bedroom, there were 3 of them. Of course, he didn't know what her name was. He didn't know. They were kind of dressed up and had some makeup on, so he was a little confused. And he asked, okay, which one of you live here? Polly says, I do. And that's the one he took. That's a kind of an interesting note on the mental condition of an offender like this.
I guess it also says that particular night he didn't stalk her because I would imagine he would not have come in to the house if he knew there were 3 girls, witnesses.
Well,
Uh-oh.
Yes. So here's what happened on that night. He entered the room, as I said, and immediately tied up the girls. So he had some ligatures, but he didn't have enough ligatures for 3 girls. He had certainly 2 ligatures and a hood device made out of a silky white cloth, and that was prepared prior to the kidnapping, so we have premeditation certainly established. But he had to cut the Nintendo cords and a strap off the purse and grab some pillowcases to tie up and put those pillowcases over the other girls, so he was a little unprepared. But right about 10:30, there is a driveway between Polly's house and the house next door. The driveway goes between the 2 houses back to a cottage that's just a few feet from the back door of Polly's main house. In the cottage is Mr. Sean Bush. He's about a 24-year-old young man who rents the cottage from Eve, and he's in there this Friday night. It's a warm October evening with a friend of his, and they're watching a movie, and his front door is wide open that looks out onto the driveway. And he says that he's right inside the door. He's watching the movie. At 10:30, thereabouts, he catches a movement out of the corner of his eyes, and he looks down the driveway, and walking right down the driveway at 10:30 is a figure of a man. And he walks down the driveway, passes within just a few feet of him in the open door, so they had to know they saw each other. He sees this figure of a man walk up onto the back porch of the house, open the back door, and enter the house. And then he says, I continue to watch my movie. That is the kidnapper. That is Richard Allen Davis. Mr. Bush, help us out here. Why didn't you have some suspicions or do something? He said, what do you mean? This guy acted as normal as could be. He wasn't creeping around. He didn't act suspicious at all. I was not concerned because his behavior was just normal. He walked into that house as if he knew that back door was open. I didn't think one thing about it. Jerry, does that sound like behavior of somebody that is going to kidnap a 12-year-old girl out of her house?
No, especially if the neighbor says that he looked right at him.
Yes. They passed within feet of each other. Davis had to know he was in there because he walked right in front of that open door. Because, the door's open, they're watching a movie, there's lights on, and it's just normal activity. And besides that, this is only 10:30 on a Friday night, and there are kids out on the street. There's activity in the neighborhood. It's not terribly late. It's not one of those 3 o'clock in the morning kind of deals. It's 10:30 on a Friday night on a warm October evening. In fact, there are a number of people that see this figure of a man in the neighborhood prior to the kidnapping. We have numerous witnesses that put him in there. The understanding of somebody that is a sexual sadist now becomes a little more clearer, is that he is now operating not as a normal person. He is absorbed by a fantasy. That fantasy under that sexual sadist is that he has a sexual fantasy for the girl that lives in Polly's house. And that explains that irrational behavior where a normal person would say, well, wait a minute, somebody's in that back cottage. I can't go through the back door because I'll be seen.
It is just amazing to be so bold and not even care that somebody's watching you.
Yes, that's the right word, bold behavior that adds elements to what we're trying to figure out what we have here. And when we get those kinds of information and we're trying to piece this case together, mom and dad are divorced, Friday night slumber party, mom's at home, people are on the street, a guy walks down the driveway, up on the back porch, enters the house like he knows that back door's open, is not acting in any way that arouses any kind of suspicion, and we're trying to figure out, as investigators, what we have. And I have to tell you that my partner initially was Sergeant Valbello for the first half of the investigation, and then later became Mike Meese, but certainly in those early weeks, we weren't convinced that we actually had a stranger abduction here, and a lot of the investigation was driven towards other theories. Was this a parental custodial issue? Was it a boyfriend kind of involvement kind of deal? Because the indicators were pointing in multiple directions, obviously. However, I'll tell you this, though, on that first night when Vale and I basically made a decision on the assumption of how we're going to move forward, I said we ought to assume that this is a stranger abduction case because we will probably get a lot of resources to help resolve the incident, which we did.
It sounds like the door was unlocked.
Well, the back door is normally locked. As a policy, Mother Eve says that either she or Polly would normally lock that door, but she tells us that as part of the deal of allowing the slumber party and the girls to come over, she asked Polly, hey, would you clean up? Can you sweep the floor, clean up the kitchen a little bit? And at the back door, there's a little kind of a pantry storage area, and that's where the vacuum and the mop and the brooms and the cleaning stuff are kind of stored. And Mom assumes that while Polly was doing those chores prior to the slumber party, she went in and out of that back door and probably just left it open. And then the party started and nobody really thought about the back door, but normally it is locked.
Yeah, that's very scary, very scary.
So Petaluma PD is an agency of about 65 officers, well-trained, very professional organization. They had a couple of CSI folks that were trained in evidence collection. They were there processing the crime scene. Remember, this is 1993. The FBI was just starting their evidence recovery team program, the ERT. San Francisco had a fledgling evidence recovery team, and I knew very little about their capabilities, but I knew they were there. And I asked Val, hey, would you mind if I called out the FBI's evidence recovery team to come up and assist in the processing of the crime scene, the bedroom and the house and whatnot? And his response was, absolutely. We can use whatever you can bring. I put a call into the supervisor at the time, who was Lillian Zilius, and woke her up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and she said, well, I'll activate the team, but what's your call on this? And I said, well, my call is it's a stranger abduction case. She said, well, if that's your feeling, we'll call out the team, which they did. They arrived about 4:30 in the morning. We had neighborhood canvases going on. We had perimeter set up. Searches were being done. The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office had their helicopter up searching the parks with searchlights and that sort of thing. Our evidence recovery team kind of took over the crime scene and started processing that. About that time, I told Vale, well, we need to get down to the PD and set up a command post, but before we do that, let's talk to Mom. We went over, talked to Eve just briefly. I tried to articulate what was going to happen over the next day or so if it lasted that long. We were going to have agents there. We were going to do certain things on the phone. We would probably have her come down to the police department the following morning to do some other things. The two girls were interviewed at the house. We called a sketch artist from San Rafael PD. He came up and we had a kind of a picture of what this guy looked like. He was a bearded man with salt and pepper kind of beard, wavy hair, stocky built, dressed in dark clothing, wearing a bandana, pretty much what we had. And Vale and I went down to the PD, set up a command post, because I suspected we were going to be inundated with calls and leads, and we needed to be prepared. Certainly there was a lot going on in the neighborhood. Searches were being conducted and neighborhood canvases and that sort of thing. We notified our polygraphers. We had two great polygraph examiners in San Francisco. We got them up pretty early to start doing some polygraphs with the father and the mother and that sort of thing.
Now, is that standard procedure?
Yeah, kind of the standard procedures of kidnapping responses. You have to clear the inner space, which not only is the physical space, that being the bedroom, the house, the property, and then now you spread out in the neighborhood, start clearing neighbors' homes, and as that gets broader and broader, you also have to clear the people that are close to your victim. You have to clear mom and dad, maybe uncles and aunts and people who are close to your victim, because quite often, many of these cases involve custodial issues and people that know the family, and you want to clear those before you move out into, unknown suspects, registered sex offenders in the county and surrounding areas, and we eventually started doing that in the investigation. This case, Jerry, in very quick order by Saturday morning, got onto the media, and certainly within the first 48 hours became a national story. Again, probably because it involved a 12-year-old girl in her home doing a normal activity that most of us can kind of identify with. And it just resonated with so many folks. It hit the national media pretty quickly, and it stayed there for 65 days during the entire investigation. That benefited the investigation in some ways, and it also has some negative impacts to the investigation.
I would imagine when it became so big, and people from across the country are calling, you're really increasing the number of false leads that you're going to get. Somebody in New Jersey is saying, I saw her.
Sure. We had plenty of those. We had plenty of those. It was ironic. San Francisco FBI was gearing up for a new phase in the Unabomber case. And they had brought out for this new phase the FBI Rapid Start Team. And they were down in San Francisco getting set up to kick off this new phase in the Unabomber case, and anticipated getting a lot of calls and leads. And on Saturday afternoon, or might have been Sunday morning, I received a call from a supervisor in San Francisco, and they were very, very generous. They said, Eddie, we got Rapid Start out here for the Unabomber. It sounds like this case is going ballistic. Would you want Rapid Start up there to set up to handle the calls and the leads that are coming in? Again, this is just a couple of days into the case, and we had no way to predict how long the case would go or how many calls we would eventually get that would generate leads. But it was one of those things where I said, why not? I don't know where this thing is going. I know we're getting a lot of calls right now, and I'm getting overwhelmed.
Could you explain what exactly is Rapid Start?
Yeah, Rapid Start is the first generation of a computerized lead management system where on a case that has just a high volume of leads and information, you computerize all that information into a system that is searchable and retrievable. It tracks those leads through a system where the leads are assigned to a team. You can track those leads as a management tool and follow the development of those leads, whether they need additional resources or time to be completed. Really, the only way to handle a case of this magnitude, because you just can't keep all that information in your head, and you certainly can't chart it up on butcher paper on the walls like we used to do in the old days. It's called Orion now. It's gone through a couple of generations in the development of this lead management system or case management system, but this was the first generation. It was called Rapid Start, and they brought up these folks with all the computers, the forms, and they were set up by Sunday night. Thank God they were there, because before this case was over, we received in excess of 60,000 tips.
Wow.
Phone calls, walk-ins, self-generated tips.
How many of those did you actually do something with?
Yes, very good question. Here was our system. Out of the 60,000 tips, we generated 12,000 and change actionable leads. Now, here's what I tell folks about that. Leads are this. Leads could be, and typically our teams were one FBI agent and one detective. And we would send out these teams. A lead could be, you send out a team and they would cover a lead, they go interview somebody, they come back, do a quick little report, close out the lead. It costs those two investigators an hour. That could be one of the 12,000 leads. Or one of those leads could be a lead where Vallejo PD called us about 2 weeks into this thing. It was on a Friday night. And they go, hey, we arrested this guy who was breaking into a home over here. The home is occupied by a mother and a 12-year-old daughter. He had with him a rape kit that had binding material, some handcuffs, and some other things. He has an extensive rap sheet of assaults and rapes, and he kind of looks like your guy. We spent in excess of 10,000 investigative hours with search warrants and interviews and seizures and polygraphs, endless leads on this one, and this was one lead of the 12,000. And so we had the 1 hour variety, we had the 10,000 hour variety, and we also had everything in between. And then we prioritized the leads, Jerry, where we had three different kinds of leads. We had a immediate, a priority, and a routine. We had a number of immediate leads where if we assigned a team a lead that was designated immediate, they dropped everything. What I told them, I said, your life ceased to exist until you get this lead done. You don't call home. You don't get coffee. Your life is this lead. You must get this lead done now. You need more resources, you're going to get it. You need more time, you're going to get it. But you are on this lead until it's done. We had a number of priority leads, and you had 24 hours basically to get that lead done. And then we had a number of routine leads, and that was a 48-hour window. And of course, if you needed more time or if you needed more resources on any of those leads, you certainly got it.
And who's making this decision? Are you looking at every lead? Are you designating, categorizing every lead?
I'm not. No, we had lead reviewers. We called them the mushroom heads. These were 4 individuals, 12 on, 12 off, 60 days in a row. And they sat at Petaluma PD and they reviewed leads. What we did and what I did is I created the criteria in which a lead would be generated. And the criteria pretty much was if the tip or the lead had 3 shards of information or nuggets of information that were pertinent to the investigation. A bearded guy with a young girl in a white car. We had this description of a white car or dirty white vehicle we thought that the kidnapper might be associated with. But if the lead had 3 tidbits of information, that were kind of fit the theme of the investigation, if you will, that generated a lead. And it depended on how rich the tip was with information, whether it was an immediate priority or a routine. I can't articulate to anybody really after almost 20 plus years the amount of work that this investigation accomplished in 60 days. 12,000 plus leads, hundreds of search warrants and polygraphs, and conducting individual investigations on alibi sex offenders up and down Northern California, not to mention the investigation into the family and the neighborhood and suspects we developed that were related to maybe an uncle or a distant uncle of somebody in the family, and all the typical things that come up in this investigation, as well as the false leads. And we had certainly a high volume of media coverage, which you want in a big case like this because it does generate the leads for you, but it also attracts the negative kind of stuff that a case like this generates. We had the false calls from the little girl over in Haywood that she pretended she was Polly, and that caused a lot of heartburn on our part.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. When I give my presentation, Jerry, I talk about investigative strategies, and one of those strategies is I tell them that on a case of this magnitude, as a lead investigator, sometimes you think about what you're doing because there's a ton of stuff that's being done. But at times, you need to sit down with your colleagues and have a discussion about what you're not doing. We did that a couple of times. Actually, we did that on a regular basis. Every 3 or 4 days, we would get together, review what was going on, and then I would end the conversation by saying, hey, guys, what aren't we doing? Is there something we're not doing? And sometimes that really helped our investigation. It identified some things that we hadn't considered before, measured the value of that, and made a decision on what we were going to do. Unfortunately, we didn't do it enough. In a good instance, a couple of days into this investigation, because of the high media coverage, Mark Klaas got a call at his home. It was a young gal's voice. She said she was Polly. Mark Klaas was convinced it was his daughter. She said that she was at a hotel. She didn't know where she was, that she couldn't talk for very long, and the call really only lasted less than a minute. We had set up a trap trace on Mom's phone because that's where Polly lived. We did not set up a trap trace on Dad's phone. We didn't think that at the time was a place where a call would come in, and we lost that opportunity to determine where that call came from.
Take it that call gave you some hope, though.
That gave us some hope, for sure, but I wondered if I was going to have much of a career if that turned out to be Polly Klaas and we missed the opportunity to find her. We obviously set up a trap trace on that phone as well as additional phones, not knowing if anything would happen. And 3 or 4 days after that first call, unbelievably, a second call came in from a girl. This time, Mark wasn't home, but Jerry, I want to say his brother answered the phone. Yeah, but it wasn't Mark that answered the second call. Same thing, said she was Polly. And we traced the phone back to a residence in Hayward, California. I'm telling you, when we got that information that it was potentially the same girl, we contacted the Hayward FBI office. They scrambled a couple of agents. I think it was only 4 or 5 of them that were around. And we said, hit it like right now. They went over to this location, didn't need a search warrant because it was exigent circumstances. They hit the house, guns drawn. They get into the house. It's a kind of a normal family, and they're just basically shocked that the FBI is coming in with their gray jackets and guns drawn, telling everybody to get down. And they do a search of the house, no sign of Polly. They get everybody separated, secured. They sit down with this normal family who is basically in shock of what just happened. They have a young daughter there, and through this exchange, the young daughter admits making both phone calls.
Now, why would she do that?
Well, again, remember now, this case is really a high-profile case by now. It's in the media. Everybody's watching it. Kids are talking about it at school, and this was kind of a dare. Her friends talked about the Polly Klaas case, and somebody must have said, wouldn't it be great if we just called and impersonated Polly, and they thought it would be fun to do that. You know how young children sometimes make wrong decisions, and this gal decided to do it. Mark Klaas's phone number was in the phone book, and they found it, made the call. We had a very serious talk with that young girl, and by the time we were done, I can tell you she got the message.
Wow. Well, let me ask about you. I mean, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. It's a personal question. Do you have kids? Do you have a young daughter at this time?
Yes, I had a family of 3 children, 2 young daughters and a son.
What kind of emotional roller coaster are you on? I mean, first,
oh my God,
you feel like you failed because you didn't have the phone number tapped at the father's house. And then you think that you've found this girl and you go to the home and it was just a prank. I can't imagine.
A huge emotional roller coaster ride. You have hopes that she's alive. We know statistically that when young children are kidnapped after the first day or so, chances of a successful recovery are greatly diminished. We know that. This is now a week or 10 days into the case, and we get this first indication that maybe she's alive, and now we have a chance to recover her. And we act very quickly, boldly. We find the location, and then all of a sudden we find out it's a prank. It's a huge letdown, no doubt about it. But these are kinds of cases that generate these kinds of things, and this was not the first time we had our hopes up. There was a number of these kinds of roller coaster up and downs where we thought we had a good chance, a good lead, and then you get let down at the end of it. But you just have to kind of, pull your pants up, get ready for the next day, and hopefully you get a good lead the next day.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I tell my audiences about this time now, the case is really in the media. Again, high-profile case, national media, Dateline, all the big programs are carrying segments. Polly Klaas is on Time magazine. We're having press releases. We're having 4 a day. We're having 2 in Petaluma, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and 2 in San Francisco, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. So the PIOs are putting out daily news briefings, which is good. That's generating some of those 60,000 calls. That's creating more leads. And it's just a giant investigative machine that is trying to find Polly Klaas. We get notified that Hollywood is very interested, almost unannounced, but not quite. We got very short notice that Winona Ryder was coming up from Hollywood. She wanted to offer some assistance. She was down in Hollywood reading the paper and watching the news, and she decided that she wants to help, like a lot of people were at this time.
Did she have a connection to the area?
Yeah, she does. She actually grew up younger age in Petaluma, so she has a connection there. She flies up on Harrison Ford's jet, comes to Petaluma, and wants to meet with the investigative team. So Chief of Police, myself, Vale Bello, a few other lead detectives, and she says, well, myself and some Hollywood friends, want to offer some reward money. And we say, well, that's very generous. What are you thinking? She says, well, we want to offer $2 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, I says, thank you very much. But we had a discussion, and we agreed to accept about $250,000.
Why not $2 million?
Because we thought if we took the full $2 million and put that out as a reward, that would really generate a lot of crank calls, people looking for reward money that really didn't have any information. We felt a good compromise would be a substantial award that would keep the case in the public awareness but not attract too much of a negative backlash. Yeah, $2 million was a little bit over the top, but $250,000 is still a hefty reward. She also offered to make a press release that evening, and we sat down with Miss Ryder and said, hey, could you stick to a script? And we wrote out a little kind of a script, and she agreed to that. She did great. She went out that evening. We had a press release at Petaluma PD to hit the evening news cycle. And she went out and made a plea, to all the police, if you have any information, please help. She was great. She was really good. And it helped the case tremendously. Now you have Hollywood power behind it.
Did it increase the number of false leads, though?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. More people called. They caught more national exposure, getting calls, like you said, from across the country. We would have to send leads to various FBI offices to cover those leads based upon if it had the appropriate criteria. But yes, it certainly helped in the number of phone calls. I tell the story about survival in this case. Of course, my victim doesn't survive, but part of it is telling police officers that the survival piece of this is about them. This case, as other big cases, from what I've seen, has a tremendous effect on the officers themselves that work it. And a lot of the officers I worked on this case with did not survive. Now, they're around today, but a lot of them left law enforcement. that impacted them so much. Friendships broke up, relationships broke up because of that case. Cases of this magnitude bring a lot of pressures, high expectations that a lot of people just can't handle, as well as FBI agents. And I'll tell you a story of what happened to me. It was about day 58 in this investigation. It was a very particular bad day. The family was really hard on us because we lacked any real progress in the case. Certainly didn't have any answers for them as to where Polly was, who might have had her, who kidnapped her. The media was very hard on us, again, because we lacked any solid leads or could not identify any suspects. And I had just gotten a call that same day from the FBI office in San Francisco, and their question to me was, how long can you sustain this investigation at the level that you're running it? I thought about that and I said, well, the calls are still coming in. We're still generating leads. I would like to kind of keep this case going, with the resources I have, which was tremendous. There's no question I had tremendous resources.
How many people would you say at this point are now involved in the investigation?
Oh, my gosh. Well, that fluctuated up and down. Some days I would have hundreds of officers and investigators and search people, maybe even in the thousands. Other days there would be lulls where certain things weren't being generated at a certain pace, but then it would spike again when we get a hot lead or executing search warrants or doing surveillances. So you're managing many moving parts, and some days it's like you're almost managing a field division. And other days, you might only have 5 or 6 teams out doing leads, depending on exactly what's going on. But the office basically said, well, that's great, but we're going to give you 2 more weeks, and we're going to kind of shut it down. And that particularly hit me very hard with the other things that were going on. I remember walking out of the command post, and I was heading towards a meeting, and I started to notice that my palms of my hands were wet. And I started to have kind of an uncharacteristic shake, my hands, and I felt chilled. I had a hard time maintaining a coherent train of thought. And I went, wow, man, I had to get away. So I found a little office, an interview office there at Petaluma PD, just had a desk and a couple of chairs, closed the door, and I was sitting in there alone. And I distinctly remember thinking to myself, so this is what a nervous breakdown feels like.
Wow.
And I said, I am not going to survive. Honestly, I had a vision of myself in a white robe and slippers in some place somewhere that this was my breaking point.
How much sleep were you getting? How much time were you able to spend at home away from this?
Not much, and that was my weakness. This was day 58. I had no days off at this point in time. Had worked. I can't tell you the hours. I don't remember seeing my family much during this time. I was a runner. I was a competitive runner back in those days. I hadn't run at all, hadn't done any of the things that I normally do to relieve stress or that I feel was part of a normal life. That was totally void for 58 days. Then add on the pressures of the case like this, and I was at the breaking point. I remember that Dale Bello and a few of my friends from Petaluma PD found me in that room, and they got me out of that room and took me out of there, and kind of, as I say, slapped me around a little bit, but but kindly. They got me kind of squared away and gave me some breathing room, and kind of got me back in the saddle a little bit. But I didn't know how long I could sustain it. Even personally. As luck would have it, we got our first break a couple of days after that.
Wow. Well, first of all, I have to tell you how important it is, and I know you know this and you've been thanked about, sharing that so many times, but it's so important for you to share that information, to let people know about the sacrifice, the personal commitment that investigators and agents make in cases like this, because sometimes people forget about that.
Exactly. And, I think a case agent or a lead investigator is the person that, I quite often told Vale, hey, go home, take the day off. I'll see you in a couple of days, take the weekend off. Or I tell some other person that had been working, endless hours, all right, you're done for the day, get out of here, And I failed to do that for myself. and I was doing the case no good, getting to a point where I was dysfunctional.
So did you take that break, or because of this new?
Well, I knew that if the office was only going to give me a couple more weeks, that I was going to try to just get it to that point in time where we were going to have to make some very significant decisions on what role we were going to play, what role I was going to play in this case, but never had to make that decision because, like I said, a couple of days later we got our first break, and then it rolled pretty quick after that.
All right, so don't keep us in suspense. What was that break?
All right, our break came about 2 months after the abduction. A very ordinary location in Sonoma County. It's a rural area between the town of Santa Rosa and the town of Sonoma. A woman named Dana Jaffe is out on her remote mountainside property, which is up on a hillside, mountainside, a wooded area. She's out walking her property. She had just had some woodcutters come up and trim some trees, and she thought she'd go out and inspect this area with a friend. She's walking along a hillside under some trees, and she comes upon a scene that concerns her a little bit. The scene is some articles of clothing scattered in an area where they shouldn't be. There's some red tights from a young gal, a sweatshirt. There's a condom wrapper, some strapping material, a ligature, and that sort of thing. And she's a little concerned. She doesn't quite understand why that would be on her property in this area. And she puts a call into the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office that she's got this scene out there that she's a little concerned about. They dispatch a deputy, Mike McManus is his name. Deputy McManus gets a call, and it's a very routine call. It is routine as they come. I think it's put out as found property, possible suspicious circumstances. That's it. So the deputy responds to this call, meets Dana Jaffe up at her house, takes the deputy to this hillside scene, which is only about 20 feet up the hillside off the driveway, and shows him the scene. And Deputy McManus then, because of his training, says, yeah, this is probably some kids were up here maybe, having a party, maybe, some sex, I've seen this before. But then she says, well, 2 months ago, I had a trespasser on the property, and I called the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. A couple of deputies came out and confronted this trespasser, and I didn't want this guy arrested. He was kind of creepy. They kind of interviewed him, kind of searched his car, didn't find anything, and I just said, hey, get this guy off the property and tell him to never come back. The two of them were talking about this incident that happened 2 months ago, and because of the public awareness, the news media of this case, they both said, well, I think that was the night that Polly Klaas was kidnapped. They absolutely have no idea at this point in time that this scene could remotely be connected to the case. But Mike McManus, on a routine call, does the right thing. He says, well, listen, I'll put a call into Petaluma PD. I don't know. Maybe this has something to do with it. So he puts a call into Petaluma PD. We eventually dispatch Detective Larry Pelton to go out and meet Deputy McManus on this call because it had enough nuggets, in the lead.
So this is one of those priority leads where you had a number of things checked off?
Yeah, it was a priority lead. It wasn't immediate, but it was a priority lead. And Pelton, oh yeah, I know McManus, and he went out to just meet him. So McManus, as a good deputy, collects a few items off the hillside, but he leaves the majority of the evidence there. Puts a few of those things in the trunk of his car. He goes down to his little substation in the town of Sonoma, and he tells Pelton, hey, meet me down there. I'm going to do a little checking on this incident that happened 2 months earlier while I'm waiting for Pelton. So McManus pulls up what essentially is called the FI, a very simple report done by the deputies that confronted this trespasser on the night of the kidnapping, gets the information from that call, pulls a few items off the hillside, like I said, lays them out on his desk in the substation because they were getting wet from the rain and the dew. And then when Pelton arrives, he meets McManus at the substation. Pelton walks in. McManus says, hey, here's some information that happened on the night of the kidnapping. This guy was stopped up on the hillside, hands him the report of the stop and this guy's criminal history statement, and said, and by the way, I collected a few things off the hillside, and here they are. And one of the things that McManus collected was a ligature made out of white silky cloth. Detective Pelton was one of the Petaluma police officers that collected the white ligatures in the bedroom of the night of the kidnapping.
Wow.
And he now has in his hands the information of the stop by the two deputies with the trespasser. He has his rap sheet and descriptive data on this rap sheet, and he looks at the white cloth and he goes, that looks exactly like the cloth that was in the bedroom. Larry Pelton picks up the phone. I'm sitting back at Petaluma PD. I'm hardly aware that he's even down there. And he calls and says, I need to talk to Eddie. Somebody rushes into wherever I was. Pelton needs to talk to you right now. This is pretty unusual, very unusual. So I get on the phone, and Larry Pelton says this, Eddie, you need to get down here. What do you mean, Larry? You and Mike Meese need to get down here. This could be it.
Wow.
Jerry, I tell this story. I've told this story 1,000 times. As I'm telling you right now, as it did that day, the hair goes up on the back of my neck as it is right now, because I recount that when he says that so profoundly, and it hasn't. Nothing like this has happened for 60-some days. And one of my trusted, seasoned investigators says, you better get down here. This could be it. This must be really important. So I grab Mike Meese. We jump in a car. We head down there. It takes about 30 minutes, 35 minutes to get there. In the meantime, Pelton, waiting for us to arrive, gets one additional item, the photograph of the guy that was involved in the trespassing. And then when Mike Meese and I get there, Pelton gives us a quick brief. We look at the cloth. We look at the FI stop, the rap sheet, and the photograph. And I tell folks that Mike Meese and I were up on that hillside. It's kind of like a scene out of a Sherlock Holmes movie. It was foggy, a little misty, and I looked at Mike Meese, and he looked, and it was like a simultaneous, this is it. We got the break we needed. And I told Mike Meese, I said, Mike, hang on to your butt. This is going to be a wild week. And I'll tell you, Jerry, it was more than that. Much, much more than a wild week, because it just, rushed. The next 4 or 5 days was so much happened in those 4 or 5 days that it's almost hard to describe.
So what do you do first? What do you do first?
Very good question. I did two things. Well, we locked down the scene first, and then I called the FBI headquarters in San Francisco, and I said, I need to reactivate the evidence recovery team. I've got a crime scene up here on a mountainside on Pythian Road. Here's what I got. And so we activated those resources. I called Special Agent Dave Alford, an agent in Santa Rosa. He was also an evidence recovery agent. And I said, Dave, you're coming down here tonight, and you're getting on the red eye back to Washington, and you're taking one piece of evidence. He says, really? I said, if you can do it, I'll be indebted to you for life. And he got down there. He picked up that white cloth because the other ligatures were back at FBI laboratory. And I said, you're taking this back to the lab tonight, and they're going to meet you at the airport, and they're going to take this cloth and do a comparison to the ligatures that we took out of the bedroom. He got down there. He grabbed that piece of evidence. I don't know how he did it, Jerry. He got on that flight, and he got back there that very next morning, and they did exactly that. They got him to the lab. They examined that cloth from Pythian Road, and it was a perfect match to the cloth from the bedroom.
Bingo.
Bingo. We amassed a whole bunch of resources. You know, you have evidence recovery, the security, cadaver dogs, search and rescue, additional investigative teams, etc. And this thing just launched into the final, what I call the final stages or phases. We conducted operations up on Pythian Road for 2 or 3 days, conducting searches, evidence recovery, photography, all that sort of thing, canvassing, you know, the neighbors and whatnot. We immediately learned that the guy that was trespassing was Richard Allen Davis. Obviously, we learned immediately that he was on parole. He was paroled down to San Mateo County, which is a county south of San Francisco, a good 150 miles away from Petaluma, but still in the Bay Area. And then we got his parole record, and they said, yeah, you know, we haven't seen him in 3 or 4 weeks, but, you know, he has a mother that lives in Petaluma. We found her. She hadn't seen him. And they also said, well, he's been telling me he's staying at his sister's home north of Ukiah on an Indian reservation called Coyote Valley. It's one of these little, in California, they have a lot of these Indian reservations, but they're called rancherias. A very small 100-acre reservation. A couple of families might live on them with a dozen homes, and that's where the sister lived. And based on that information, we certainly set up a lot of surveillances. We determined that he was there. Mike Meese and I went up as soon as we got that information because I wanted to get descriptive data for search warrants. I just wanted to get eyes on the house as well as Mike did. We were kind of curious. We find this location. It's in a remote area north of Ukiah, back in this Indian reservation. It kind of winds around the trees and hills. We find this little home with cars and stuff parked outside. And I see back in the back of this property, almost hidden, was this kind of beat up white Pinto. And I told Mike, I said, oh gosh, we can't be that lucky. Can that be the car that was up on Pythian Road? And is that possibly the white car we think that this guy was reported, in the neighborhood of the kidnapping? I jumped out of the car and kind of snuck around and got the license plate and said, yep, that's the car from Pythian Road. So things were happening very fast. We set up some big operations. We brought out some FBI profilers. We brought out some evidence techs from Washington to process the car. We got search warrants written. I had a big plan to execute search warrants on the house, get him in custody because he had a parole violation. We can at least get him in custody. FBI Behavioral Science Unit laid out a great interview strategy plan for us. Mike Meese and I made a decision that he was going to handle the interview with FBI profiler. That was Larry Taylor. I was going to handle all the search operations and investigation out at the Indian Reservation. We set up a second command post at Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. So we were managing two command posts, one at Petaluma, one at Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Huge operations still going on at Pythian Road mountain site. And now we're launching on some big operations on this Indian reservation and conducting searches and seizures. And we plan to get that car. We wrapped that car up like a big giant burrito and we put it on a flatbed. We took it down to Petaluma PD. It was processed down there. And when we executed the warrants, we thought Davis was at home, but he was not. But he was coming back just a couple of minutes after we executed the warrant, and we caught him at one of our perimeter checkpoints. And that's a very kind of funny story with this young deputy out there manning the checkpoint. This was a joint operation with multiple agencies involved. Mendocino County Sheriff's Office was very gracious and accommodating some of our needs, and they called in some of their deputies to work the perimeter checkpoints. And this kid was like 3 weeks out of the academy. The sheriff himself called this kid and said, hey, you need to come in, son. I'm going to have you work the Polly Klaas case. And this kid got so excited. He was telling his family that I've been out of the academy only 3 weeks, and I get to work the biggest case in the country. I can't believe this. This is great. And I don't have to really do a lot, but I'm involved. He goes out on this checkpoint. He figures he's just, this is all he's got to do. No worries. And then all of a sudden, this van rolls up, and it's Richard Allen Davis. He says he almost pees his pants. I mean, he is just like, oh, my gosh.
And it's just him alone.
He is by himself. And in the video, it says, he calmly calls it back to the command post, which is us. And I say, he did not calmly call it in. His voice is like 20 decibels off the charts. We can't figure out what he's saying. And we finally figure out, oh, my gosh, this kid's got Davis out there. And so Mike Meese and a couple of deputies go out and arrest him out there at the checkpoint. And then we kind of get back on track of our plan. So they take him over to Mendocino County.
I got to ask you this question about this young, officer. Does he hold him at gunpoint? I mean, does he let him know he's under arrest?
No, it's very calm. He just tells this guy, hey, hold on a minute. I need to call something in. He kind of walks away. He's trying to keep an eye on Davis. Davis at this time is compliant. He doesn't know what's going on. He's just rolled up on a checkpoint. Like I said, it takes us a couple of moments to figure out what this kid is trying to tell us on the radio because he's so excited. And then Davis just hangs out in his van, and a few minutes later, Mike Meese shows up, draws his gun, approaches the van, says, hey, you need to get out. Davis gets out. Davis is informed by Mike Meese he's being placed under arrest for parole violation, and handcuffs him, gets him in the car, and then takes him over to Mendocino County Sheriff's Office where we have this whole plan for this interview to occur. I'm conducting operations at the house, at the sister's house. thinking that maybe, Polly is around there somewhere. And we initiated extensive searches at that Indian reservation with cadaver dogs, a couple of days at the house, processing the house, collecting all kinds of evidence.
At the Pythian Road property, you find all of this evidence, but there's no sign of Polly or remains or anything like that.
Well, I mean, it's a mountainside, literally a mountainside, so the area is huge. And so we have a small area where the materials, the evidence is collected. That includes, a men's sweatshirt, a short sleeve sweatshirt, a condom wrapper, a girl's red tights, ligature materials, and those sorts of things. So that's in one area of this general area that's very open and forested. And so there's lots of lakes and ponds and gullies and, wooded areas. So we're conducting huge search operations over there, thinking that maybe she was assaulted and then he took her down into a lake or a ravine and dumped the body. So we're searching that area in some places, hands and knees. But Tony Maxwell was running that show over there. He's a FBI evidence recovery team leader. And, of course, then when we initiated operations at the Indian Reservation, we had to pull some of those resources off of that mountainside to start the search operations on the Indian Reservation.
So I guess the best thing for you, now that you have Richard Allen Davis in custody, is to get him to tell you exactly where she is so you don't have to use all of these resources.
Right. Again, still not knowing where she is. We were very optimistic that the evidence search of the car, the evidence search at Pythian Road, which I thought, Jerry, that this case was over, especially with the condom, because now we can link Polly to Pythian Road by virtue of the ligatures found in her bedroom, same cloth material of the Pythian. That condom would have Davis's DNA on it. That would almost seal the case forensically on the matter. And then we had the hopes of getting something out of the interview or interrogation, and the first shot of that provided nothing. But we were very optimistic that forensically we're going to be able to charge the guy, even without a body at this point in time. As things would have it, a very close examination of that condom revealed zero DNA. It was out. It was used. Apparently, it looked like it had been used. It was out of the wrapper, fully extended, so it appeared it had been used, but there was no DNA whatsoever on the condom. It's amazing. We can get DNA out of a 15-million-year-old dinosaur tooth buried in a desert somewhere that we've never heard of, but I couldn't get one hit of DNA off that condom that would have been rich with, some sort of DNA material. But it's organic out in certain conditions. It doesn't last forever. In our case, at least on that piece of evidence, it didn't have any. Now, we did get out of the bedroom in the early collection of the evidence some very interesting things. The FBI evidence recovery team recovered some additional palm prints and fingerprints from the bedroom that the police didn't see or collect using their techniques. And then we also collected some forensic evidence off the rug in which the girls were playing on. In addition to some fibers that tied back to some of the ligatures, we found some carpet fibers that were not tied to any known source of carpet, whether it be from the house or automobiles. And we also found some hair from the bedroom that was collected off the rug that was submitted to the FBI laboratory, hair that we could not link to any family members or friends of Polly, as well as one hair that had some root material that actually had DNA on it. It was enough of a sample to get a DNA type on it. One of the warrants that we executed after we interviewed Davis at Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, he was Mirandized, and then afterwards he basically denied any involvement in the Polly Klaas case. The interview ended without revealing anything, but we executed a warrant on him, obviously, to collect his DNA, hair samples, his palm prints, full case prints. That was all immediately submitted to the FBI laboratory. The car, like I said, was taken down to Petaluma PD and processed down there, and that evidence was submitted to the FBI lab as well. And in addition to that, a lot of evidence from the house and everything else from Pythian Road was all being submitted to the FBI laboratory for examination. We were pretty optimistic that something positive was going to come out of all of that, and in fact it did.
What kind of hits did you get?
The very first hit I got was the examination of our major case prints to the unknown latent fingerprints taken from the bedroom by the FBI evidence recovery team. And in that examination, they were examining a palm print that was taken off of Polly's. She had like a little bunk bed in her bedroom. And on the top rail, we collected a palm print that remained unknown until we submitted Davis's major case prints, which included palm prints. The examiner was a guy by the name of Mike Smith, and he conducted what he says is probably the most nerve-wracking comparisons in his life. He did 3 or 4 examinations to make sure he was correct. He determined that the palm print taken off of Polly's bed rail was the palm print of Richard Allen Davis. He called out to the command post, asked for me. I picked up the phone. I'm talking to this Mike Smith from FBI Laboratory, Light and Fingerprint Section. He says, Eddie, I've got some news for you. And he relays his findings. And I got to tell you, Jerry, I spent 30 years in the FBI, so that was my best day. When Mike Smith said, I can positively identify this palm print from the bedroom as Davis's.
Wow. I can tell from the silence that you're still emotional about it to this day.
Yeah.
You got me going, too. It had to have been a flood of emotion, for you, and I take it everybody in the command post.
Well, it was a typical command post, the chaos, dozens of people coming and going, and of course at this time we're revving at 110 RPMs, because we're all this stuff is happening at once. So hanging up the phone and being able to get up and say, hey, can I have some quiet? I've got some news for everybody. And Jerry, to deliver that news was something else. I don't think I ever got more bear hugs from big cops. One in particular was Dennis Nowicki, and he was a big, tough, old-time detective, burly guy, 6'4", 250 pounds of muscle and brawn. Anyway, he was crying like a baby.
Wow. That kind of made it all worthwhile, all the sacrifices that everybody had made.
Sure. But what I tell people is, that was my best day in the Bureau. And I also say my worst day.
I know what the worst day is. You still have to find Polly.
Right.
Well, tell us about that. How did you find her?
Yeah, so, of course, we did a lot of investigative. We had a live lineup. We brought the girls up. They identified Davis as the guy that was in the bedroom. All the other evidence was and matches were coming in. So we knew we had a tremendous case developing, but we just had one missing piece. We really wanted to find Polly. We were optimistic that we might find her either at Pythian Road still, or even maybe at the Indian Reservation. So those things were still kind of unfolding. And so a couple of days, now Davis is now in isolation at the Mendocino County Jail as these things were unfolding. And I'm up at the Mendocino County Command Post, and it was funny because I'm focusing on all these other things, and then the shift sergeant from Mendocino County Sheriff's Office walks in and goes, hey, where's Freyer? And I go, hey, that's me. He goes, hey, there's somebody here that wants to see Davis. And I, really? He says, yeah, this guy says he's a friend. He wants to talk to Davis, and is it okay with you? And I said, well, if there's no security issues, I don't see any issue with it, because now I'm curious who this guy might be. And they allow this guy to go in to visit Davis in one of those visitor areas of a jail. This guy turns out to be Marvin White. Marvin White is a gentleman who owns a welding shop down in San Mateo County. He quite often hires prisoners coming out of the state penitentiary to work in his welding shop. That's one of the trades that some of these prisoners learn. While they're in prison, Davis learned how to weld. This guy hired Davis for only a period of a couple of weeks. Davis stopped going to work. But Mr. White, like everybody else in the country, is reading for the first time in the paper about Davis's palm print being found in Polly's bedroom. That was the big news of the day. He's reading that newspaper announcing that and goes, Davis, Richard, well, I know that guy. He used to work for me. And like so many other people, he wants to help. So he gets in his car. He finds his way up to Mendocino County. As I understand it, he'd never been to Mendocino County, but he finds his way to the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office and walks in and says, because he wants to help, he wants to go in and talk to Davis and say, hey, help the police. You know, they want to find Polly. If you're involved with this, tell them where Polly is. So he goes in with that intent. He sits down with Davis.
Do you know that before he goes in? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know the purpose. I don't want to talk to this guy prior to the meeting to influence what he's going to say, or I don't want any interference about this meeting because I don't want to be accused of, because he's been Mirandized. He's protected by Miranda.
Okay.
I can't be any part of any interview or attempt to interview, whether it be direct or through somebody else. I'll figure out what they talked about afterwards. I'll pull the guy out, you know, after this visit's over and say, okay, hey, you know, what's going on? Why are you here? I'll get that information anyway. So Davis meets with this guy. This guy pleads with him. Davis says, hey, they don't know anything. I was not involved in that. The police don't know crap. And then Mr. White has a copy of the paper with him. He puts up the paper on the window, and Davis reads for the first time via this newspaper that his palm print was collected by the FBI out of Polly's bedroom. Apparently his face goes white. He basically just gets up, turns around, and leaves. Davis now stews on that for, I think, a very short period of time, and finally reaches out to the jail folks and says, hey, I want to talk to those cops, meaning, you know, Mike Meese and us. We get word that Davis now wants to talk to us. Now, he's been Mirandized. One of the exceptions in Miranda is that if the suspect or the defendant reinitiates the contact with police, then we can go back in and talk to them about the kidnapping. We certainly got plenty of legal opinions on whether this situation fit the exception, which we've got federal and local opinions on it. They said yes, this is one of the exceptions to Miranda, and we set up a quick interview at Davis's request. He wants to talk to us. Our goal at this point in time is to re-interview him, get his story about the kidnapping, but ultimately we want to know if he will tell us where Polly is. So this interview reconvenes with Mike Meese and Larry Taylor. He's a FBI profiler. They sit down for a 3-4 hour interview, and I'm getting prepared to, once we determine where she is, you know, to gear up enough resources and agents and investigators to go to another scene. Davis then gets re-Mirandized, and he launches into this confession, which I don't want to call it a confession. It's what we call an admission. And so some of the story he tells is, I think, factual, and some of it's not. But anyway, he basically says an admits to kidnapping Polly, getting her in his car. He drives around Sonoma County. He kind of says he gets lost. He ends up on Pythian Road. His story kind of matches what happens up at Pythian Road because, you know, we can match it with deputies and other witnesses, and he knows that. He said he got her out of the car because his car got stuck. He put her up on the hillside just fine. He didn't assault her or do anything. He just put her up on the hillside. And when the deputies came and helped him get out of there and get him off the property, he waited for a period of time, about 30 minutes, and he went back to get Polly. And she was just sitting up on that hillside, just 25 feet off the driveway, you know, just those few feet away from the deputies. And she was just fine and just waiting for him up there. He got Polly, got her back in the car. He drove around. He just panicked. He didn't know what to do with this girl. And he found this area, and he's telling Meese and Taylor that he gets to this location in Cloverdale, California, and late at night, he gets her out of the car. He strangles her there and then takes her in this field and dumps her in the field. And he's agreed to take us to this recovery site, to the body site.
Do you believe that, or do you believe that she was actually killed at Pythian Road?
Well, that's a very good question, and our theory is that she was killed at Pythian Road, and there are several reasons why we believe that. He says he killed her at Cloverdale. We believe she was killed at Pythian, but there's evidence that suggests that she was killed at Pythian. But anyway, I'm getting intelligence that the body recovery site is going to be in Cloverdale, and so I amass a whole bunch of folks. We started heading up 101. We stage at a winery that's just south of Cloverdale. I grab Dave Alford, who has returned from Washington. And I look in the crowd, and there's the face of Sergeant Vale Bellow. And I said, Vale, we started this thing 2 months ago. Come on, let's finish it. He jumped in the car, and the three of us went the additional, I think it's 5 or 8 miles up to Cloverdale. The interview is concluded. He's agreed to bring Mike Meese and with Taylor down to Cloverdale. And so the plan was for us to meet. And I have 2 mandates from the command staff, FBI officials in San Francisco. They asked me to do 2 things. They manage the body recovery site. And then 2, we would like you to get eyes on the body when you go up there. We're going to call the family in. We're going to prepare a press release. And when you get eyes on the body and confirm to us that you found Polly Klaas. And I said, yeah, I think I can do that. And I felt confident that I would recognize something, clothing, hair, something that I could say, yeah, this is Polly Klaas. And I tell folks I was pretty naive in saying I could do that.
What do you mean, emotionally or visually?
Visually. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. So we met up at Cloverdale. It was very dark night, pitch black. They came south from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. We came north, the 3 of us. We met along Highway 101 just south of Cloverdale. It's a kiln where they used to do charcoal burning. There's an old kind of a warehouse, dilapidated warehouse, and then a field. He led us out to this field where there was a board with some debris on it. And underneath the board, Dave Alford and I walked out. I lifted up the board, and there was a body. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, 60-some days. I couldn't tell if it was a male or female. I mean, I knew it wasn't an infant. And I also knew it wasn't a huge remains, but, I couldn't distinguish any clothing or anything. So I put the board down. We reversed our steps back. I told Mike Meese and Taylor to get Davis out of there. They left. I remember this very distinctly, Jerry. I remember Vale standing next to me. Of course, we were bonded with this case from day one, and he pretty much knew everything that I knew. I remember his voice. It's as clear today as it was 20-some years ago. He said, Eddie, it's got to be her. And silence, and he said it again. It's got to be her, Eddie. And I kind of reflected, and I'll tell you that I was asking for some divine intervention, because in my gut and my mind and the totality of everything I knew, Jerry, at that point in time, what brought me to that spot in Cloverdale was Polly Klaas. Everything was, there was nothing, and everything that I was considering told me it was her. There was nothing that would indicate it wasn't her.
What was your hesitancy?
Well, I didn't know if I should call and say, yes, this is Polly Klaas, or should I call and say, well, I've got a body here. Let's wait a couple of days, which would have been the prudent thing to do, I think, when I think back on it. But my instincts were so overwhelming, as well as Vale, that this was Polly Klaas. The family, mom and dad, were down at the police station. The news media was going nuts down there. It was a scene that people said it was just crazy. And I had one of those old phones, the old cell phones. And so I thought about it for a few moments, and I picked up the phone, and I talked to Mark Michon, who was the ASAC. And I said, tell Mom and Dad we found Polly Klaas. I'll tell you, Jerry, I didn't know. I had no positive identifier that it was Polly Klaas, other than what I knew in my soul.
What were you hoping to find, like a piece of clothing that you were familiar with?
Yeah, I knew she had a Samba top on that was pink. I knew she had a white skirt. I knew that, there would be maybe, some distinguishing feature that I would be able to say, yeah, that's Polly. That was my naivety at play there. And when I tell that to my classes and my audiences, they basically shake their head, because today we want to work in certainties. And I think, like I said, the prudent thing would have been, hey, listen, we have a body. We're going to work on the assumption that it is Polly Klaas, and we'll release the positive identifying evidence as we get it. That probably would have been the more safer answer. I'll also admit that I did not sleep that night, knowing that if I had made the wrong call, I would have been probably on some foreign island somewhere by now. The evidence recovery folks came in. We secured the scene. We processed that scene for a better part of 3 days. The first thing that they did, Jerry, was they fingerprinted her index finger. Her hands were mummified, and the fingerprints on her left index finger was so well preserved, they took a picture of it. Then they got that picture down to the command post. Now, we had a fingerprint card that Polly made during one of those school visits, where they'd fingerprint kids.
Right.
Of course, we had that in our command post waiting for this day. We took that picture, compared it to the left index finger of that card. Saturday morning, bingo. Within an hour or so, they said, yes, that's Polly Klaas.
The relief.
Relief. Later that afternoon, we had some post-mortem dental, verification. And, of course, a couple of days later in the week, obviously the DNA came back. So
I do want to go back to the two officers that initially detained Richard Allen Davis at the Pythian Road property.
Yes.
I really want to know if she was dead at that point. I can't imagine being an officer knowing that they might have had a chance to have her alive or even solve the case that night instead of 60 days later. Have you had a chance to talk to them?
Sure.
I don't blame them. I don't criticize or blame them. They had no idea what they had in front of them, but I feel for them also.
Well, those were deputies Howard and Rankin. They were very professional deputies, hard chargers. They knew that this guy was up there, was giving them a phony story. He said he was out sightseeing and he got lost and the car got stuck. But they knew this guy was up to no good. Their senses were telling them this guy has something else going on. They detained Davis at the Pythian site for about 45 minutes as they were trying to figure out why he was up there, asking him questions. They did a road sobriety test on him, and their car lights were on, their radios were going, and in this detention over this 45 minutes, it was only about 25, 30 feet away up the bank from where Polly, according to Davis, was just sitting there fine and dandy. And to accept that explanation that Polly would not walk down, because you could see from that hillside crime scene, you could actually see through the canopy of the trees, there were police cars down there. She would have to have seen that and known that for that 45-minute detention. And for Davis to suggest that she just sat there and would not walk down and say, hey, I need some help here. This guy just dragged me out of my bedroom is ludicrous. The fact that Howard and Rankin, they did not know about the kidnapping at the time of the detention. They, like everybody else, in the days and weeks and the 2 months following, knew very well about the kidnapping and the artist sketch and the person that we were looking for, looked like this. They failed to put two and two together, and they've never been able to give me a reasonable explanation why they didn't. Hey, we had this thing the other night, and maybe you ought to check this out, but they never did. Would it have changed the ultimate outcome of Polly Klaas? I don't think so. I think she was dead at that time. He took her up on the hillside to assault her. That's why his sweatshirt was up there. That's why the condom was up there. That's why that cloth ligature was up there. That's why she didn't come down and say, help me. She had been assaulted and killed during this assault, and he did not go back to get Polly Klaas. He went back to get the body. And we did find some forensic evidence from the car that tied to a fabric that we got out of her hair, that the only place that we found a similar fabric was the front passenger floorboard of his car. We found similar fibers in her hair, and that suggests that those fibers exchanged themselves when her hair came in contact with the front passenger floorboard, which meant he probably went back and got the body off the hillside, put her in that Pinto and put her head down on that front passenger floorboard. More than likely, that's where that exchange occurred, as well as some other forensic evidence suggests that she was probably killed up there on Pythian Road. Do we ever really know for sure? Well, the only person who knows for sure is Richard Arnold Davis, but his story can be, judged based on, how much of it's true and how much of it's not true.
So, did you have to go to trial?
Yes.
Oh, really? He did not?
It was a death penalty case, Jerry. All death penalty cases have to go to trial. And one of the nicest compliments I've ever received in 30 years in the FBI was, obviously, this case wrapped up on the investigation. We shut down all the command posts, the operations, etc. Within a couple of days, and it was unknown to me, the district attorney, Mike Mullins, called Louis Freed, thanked the FBI for its participation, and then said, I have one more favor to ask of the FBI. Director Freed said, yeah, sure, what do you need? And he said, I want Agent Freyer on my prosecution team. Director Freed said, you got him.
Wow.
I was informed that next week, hey, Director of the FBI wants you on the prosecution team. Really? Okay. I started to report to the DA's office that week, worked with the prosecutor, Greg Jacobs, who remains a dear friend to me today. And for the next 2.5 years, I assisted the DA's office with this case.
Why don't we stop for a little bit and talk about, and I know why, but if you could share with everyone why the state prosecutor prosecuted this case, even though the FBI federally was so involved in it. Could you talk about the distinctions?
Sure. Yeah. Quite often the old standard, if you will, in terms of when the FBI assumes primary jurisdiction on a kidnapping case is whether you have a very strong interstate nexus. Usually that meant was your victim taken across state lines, or were there some other very significant interstate aspect to the case? Maybe money transferred, or some of the subjects in your case were located across state lines, that sort of thing. And that usually gave the FBI a very clear jurisdiction on the case. This case really did not have any interstate aspects to it. At the end of the investigation, it pretty much confined itself to Northern California. Though we had many counties involved that had witnesses, the suspect, the victim, the crime itself, the bodily recovery, all the major crime scenes pretty much were confined to Sonoma County or Mendocino County. So even though a lot of the work was done by the FBI, a lot of the search warrants were federal search warrants, a lot of the subpoenas and other court orders were from the federal side of the case. The assumption all along, Jerry, unless there had to be some sort of interstate aspect to it, we were working on the premise that it would eventually be prosecuted locally. That didn't deter the FBI's commitment in this case. Again, remember, reflecting back on the number of cases that were unsolved, I think our commitment to this case was we need to solve one. We need to solve one that is as egregious as this one, as traumatic as this one. Let's put everything into it and try to solve it. And we were lucky enough to do that. Obviously, we wish that we had a better outcome, but we did solve the case. We did find Polly, and we found some closure for the family.
So how long was the trial?
Well, the trial, it took a couple of years to get to trial with all of the things that go into a death penalty case. We did get a change of venue, but it wasn't too far. Change of venue was down to Santa Clara County. It was held in San Jose. The trial itself lasted about 5 months. Death penalty case has 2 phases. It has a guilt phase, and it has a penalty phase. The jury sits through both phases, and the guilt phase was a case in chief where typical trial, we put on all of our witnesses, a lot of FBI witnesses. We had a number of great witnesses from the FBI to include Chris Allen, who was the chief forensic examiner from FBI Laboratory. He came out and testified for about 4 days on all of the forensic comparisons and linking all the crime scenes together and making certain interpretations of what the forensics were trying to tell us. I had bailiff come up to me after Allen's testimony. He said to me, I've been around for 35 years, and I've heard all kinds of expert witness. That FBI guy was the best I ever heard.
Wow.
Yeah. That lasted about 12 weeks. We took a break. and then we came back for the penalty phase that lasted, I think, about 10 days, and then the jury came back. We had 7 special circumstances: murder in first degree with special circumstances, murder committed during a kidnapping, during a robbery, during a burglary, during an attempted lewd act on a child. The jury found him guilty on murder 1 as well as all special circumstances. And we concluded with the judge confirming the death penalty. It was almost 3 years, 2 months shy of 3 years from the night of the kidnapping until we got the verdict. And I got my life back.
Yeah.
Almost 3 years of a 30-year career. But going through a death penalty case, Jerry, is very rare for an FBI agent. There aren't that many on the federal side. When they occur on the local side, usually agents get involved as witnesses or in some sort of support capacity. I had the distinct pleasure of having a front row seat from this case on the night of the kidnapping all the way through the trial process, and the experience was incredible, I must say. I learned and acquired a deep admiration for our criminal justice system, knowing that these kinds of cases aren't taken lightly by the system itself, and that the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that the appropriate verdicts are reached are astonishing. And I can tell you that the appropriate verdict was reached in this case.
And what was that like to hear that verdict?
Well, there were some antics during the trial by Davis. He accused the father in one of his statements of abusing Polly, which wasn't true. He showed contempt for the court. He showed contempt for the family and never showed any remorse. But we had a great judge, Tom Hastings, and that last day during the announcement of the sentence, Judge Hastings said, "Mr. Davis, you have made it easy for this court to confirm the death penalty. I sentence you to death." And I think it validated everything that we worked for 3 years. I know it was a great and tremendous leap for the prosecutor. He was under a lot of pressure, obviously, to get that verdict, but I don't think there was any doubt, knowing the strength of the case and, what Davis did to this young girl was hard to understand.
So I take it he's sitting on death row someplace? Where is he?
Yes, he's at San Quentin death row right now. He's gone through all of the normal death penalty appeals and review processes. Those are all over that I'm aware of. And he sits on a long list of people that are here in California waiting for a date. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but that's really out of my hands.
What amazes me in talking to you about this case is how fresh it seems for you. And I take it that's because you are asked to do presentations on this case, which I think is full of lessons and best practices and things that you shouldn't do. It really gives investigators and other agents a full lesson in investigating these types of cases. But does it take a personal toll on you to have to relive this over and over again?
I don't think it takes a personal toll. I think it has so many lessons learned kind of components to it. It gives me a chance to help prepare some of our young agents and investigators that if you do catch a case like this in your careers, and some of them will, there's no doubt about it, by listening to my presentation, I think it helps them better prepare themselves when they find that they're in a very similar situation, whether it be their own wellness, case management, family issues, media, getting, resources involved, how to manage a big case like this. I'd say that if you're going to be a lead investigator in a major case, you have to have 2 primary skills. You have to be a good manager, and you have to be a good leader. A manager is a person that makes sure things are done right. And we have lots of policies and procedures, best practices, your training, lots of expertise you pull in on a big case, and all of that ensures that things are done right. But you also have to be a leader. And a leader, Jerry, has to do the right thing. And you have to make hard decisions on big cases that sometimes go counter to maybe a good friend's opinion or a supervisor's opinion. And sometimes I had to make decisions that were contrary to what the FBI wanted. In this case, sometimes I had to make decisions that were contrary to what the police wanted. At the end of the day, I try to ensure things were done right, and I try to do the right thing. If these young officers get an understanding of that a little bit during my presentations, then I think I've done my job.
Well, I know that this case has been profiled on FBI files and on investigative discovery, and so I'll put links to those episodes too, in case people want to get some additional information. We tried to cover everything that's covered in both of those 1-hour shows, but I think there's still more things that we didn't talk about. I've already mentioned to you, I've already encouraged you that this would make a great book, and hopefully in the future you'll have something out and we can all read that, and also to keep Polly's memory alive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because, Mike Meese is no longer with us. He was my partner in the latter part of this. He passed away. One of the prosecutors that assisted Greg Jacobs is no longer with us. I'm certainly not getting any younger. I'm pretty much the one person that has the front to back door knowledge of the case. But yeah, hopefully we can get a book out there.
Very good. I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. When you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI.
Sure. I came into the FBI in 1972. Interestingly enough, I came in as a clerk in the Pittsburgh office in April of 1972, 1 month before J. Edgar Hoover died. So I have hanging in my office here my appointment letter that has the signature of J. Edgar Hoover, which I display very proudly. I spent about 4 years as a clerk in the Pittsburgh office, went to night school to the University of Pittsburgh, earned a degree in administration of justice, and then entered new agents training in 1976. My first office was Phoenix, Arizona. I spent about 4 years in Phoenix, then was transferred up to San Francisco, did a number of assignments in San Francisco, including bank robbery, fugitive squad, a few years on the surveillance squad. And then in 1989, I was transferred up to the Santa Rosa Resident Agency, which is in Northern California, about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. Beautiful RA. Had a wonderful assignment there until about the year 2000, and I was asked to become the senior SWAT team leader in San Francisco. I retired in 2002. In March of 2002, right after the Winter Games in Salt Lake City, I took my SWAT team up to Salt Lake City. I don't want to say we partied, but we had a great assignment in Park City, Utah during the Winter Games. We were in Party Central during the Olympic event. We had a great assignment. I came back from the Winter Games and said, listen, I've got to retire on a high note. And that kind of wrapped up a 30-year career in the FBI.
So what are you doing now?
Well, I've done a number of things since my retirement. I've been an undersheriff for a small agency in Washington State. I went overseas for a year to Iraq. I taught, but right now I work for the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. I run the Institute of Criminal Investigation. It's a great program here in California. We train police investigators how to conduct investigations in a variety of different topics, including homicide, sexual assault, burglary, DV, a number of different things. And I also develop special training programs for officer decision-making. But yeah, I'm doing that now. I'll probably do that for another couple of years, and then I'll be done.
All right, so this is almost like an advanced in-service.
Yes, it really is. It's an advanced in-service for police officer investigators, and I get often FBI agents that attend some of these classes, so that's for them too.
We've come to the end now, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to have the last word, whatever you want to say.
Well, Jerry, I quite often finish up by saying that this kind of effort, this kind of commitment, both on the local, state, and federal level, doesn't happen with every case that you might work. In fact, it rarely happens. But it's a great example of how agencies can come together with a common goal where you can leverage the resources that, as meager as they might be with a small agency, but you can combine them with the great resources of the FBI. And when those resources come together, that commitment comes together, the objectives come together, there isn't anything more rewarding to see an agency like the FBI get 100% behind a case. And what we can accomplish when we have that commitment is just astonishing. And this is a great example where I was fortunate enough to have the full weight of the FBI behind me, because there was never a time when I asked for a surveillance team, I asked for an evidence recovery team, I asked for a resource. 100% of the time, I got it. The end result was we did solve this case, and it's something that demonstrates what the FBI can do, as well as other agencies when they come together in an important investigation.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to jerrywilliams.com and the show notes for this updated episode. There you'll see a photo of Eddie Freyer, links to 2 videos from TV shows about the abduction, and Eddie's daughter-in-law's comprehensive book on the investigation, In the Light of All Darkness. There are also photos of Polly and Eddie and national news articles about the case, as well as links to more FBI retired case file review episodes featuring crimes against children. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.